Have you ever thought that you wouldn't like a director's catalog after only seeing one of their movies and not really enjoying it? That happened to me with Yorgos Lanthimos. Flashback to late 2019, I was recommended The Killing of a Sacred Deer by some friends and people on YouTube. 17-year-old me pulled up the movie having no idea what I was getting myself into, and I didn't really have the greatest time. I had no idea that I would be delving into such depraved subject matter through such a comedic and idiosyncratic lens. Since the release of Poor Things, I've delved deeper into his filmography for him to now join the ranks as one of my favorite directors. I love his voyeuristic and almost painterly way of framing characters, his stilted and purposely wooden dialogue, and the way he's able to make me feel things while watching some of the emptiest characters in cinema. Before I get to the ranking, I want to mention some of his other projects. Firstly, I want to acknowledge Kaneda from 2005, which is Yorgos' feature film debut. I am mainly not going to focus on this because it's not easily accessible for me personally compared to the rest of his filmography. I think I'll be forgiven for this one because not many people seem to mention it on their lists. I also want to mention Nimic, which is a short from 2019, which I caught on Movie, and it was a pretty brilliantly made short film that reminded me how much you can do with so little. Just to reiterate before we get into these movies, this is my list, and I would love to know your list, so before we even begin, take the time to put your ranking of every Yorgos Lanthimos movie down below. Yorgos' second feature film, Alps, tells the story of a nurse and her three constituents who pretend to be deceased loved ones for family members or friends of deceased in order for those people to feel closure. I was initially really excited to watch this to see what skills and traits Yorgos had either developed or left behind over the years, but as I watched, I just became increasingly bored with the film. The pacing here is incredibly slow. There's so much downtime that it causes the movie to start to feel completely plotless. The third act makes up for the slowness, definitely, but I can't say that this movie didn't bore me because it really did. A lot of the cinematography felt very jumbled, or like Yorgos and his DP Christos Voudouris didn't define a clear cinematic language for this movie. There were a lot of good character moments and some pretty shocking sequences with some really good comedy overall, but I would just say that this was kind of a snooze fest. Also, my man has loved a dance sequence from the very beginning. The most recent movie on this list is definitely a silly, goofy time, but not without some moments where I felt a little sleepy. Kinds of Kindness tells three different stories with a common theme of what will somebody do to prove their devotion or love to another person. Across the board, we have a few things that are at the top of their game: the acting, the direction, the cinematography, the soundtrack, and the comedy. I just wasn't able to connect to the characters at all, which I understand is a common trope in Yorgos' movies, but this was the most disconnected I've ever felt from his characters. Each of the stories were pretty interesting, with my favorite being the third one, but there just wasn't enough in the first two to really keep me engaged. I definitely checked out once or twice, especially during the first story, where a good chunk of it felt very predictable. The last story was incredibly predictable as well, but I still enjoyed it just because of how weird it was. Overall, a pretty fun time, yes, but there wasn't really much for me to connect with. The Lobster is probably the most fun of Yorgos' movies, but it's also one of the more empty films that he's made. It tells the story of a man who, after being left by his wife, admits himself to a hotel where if he does not find a partner in a certain amount of time, he'll be turned into an animal of his choosing. It's a pretty interesting premise, and it seems to have as much fun with the premise as it possibly can, while also, again, staying true to the themes. With a lot of this movie inherently focusing on what it's like to cope with loneliness, we would need a lot of characters to feel empty for that to succeed, and I'm definitely able to connect to characters a lot easier here than in Kinds of Kindness. I think that maybe the first time I watched this, I was just super tired or something, because my second viewing flew by really quickly, and it definitely stood out as being one of the more touching films in his catalog. I find this movie so unbelievably hilarious, you would find it concerning. If you saw how hard I laughed at this movie, you would probably check me in. Dogtooth tells the story of 3 adults who've been held captive inside of the grounds of their home by their father and raised to be human pets meant to bow to the will of their parents. The performances are probably some of the best in any of his movies because every single person here understands the bit. They fully trusted what Yorgos was going for, no matter how batshit insane this premise is. Everyone here is giving 100%, which means it seems like they aren't even trying at all to be as awkward and deadpan as they are, and it comes off as this is legitimately how these people naturally behave. The concept itself is one of the most interesting for me as we explore what it would be like for a family dynamic to be warped by a father treating his grown adults as if they are his family dogs. It definitely leads to some of his more uncomfortable affairs, but it leads into one of the funniest third acts in his entire filmography. So yeah, this movie took a while, but it definitely grew on me with much analyzation and research. There's a lot to talk about, and I don't want this one section to be a whole 15-minute video in itself, so I'll try to keep it quick. The Killing of a Sacred Deer tells the story of a doctor who, after not being able to save his father, is cursed with a terrible choice by a teenage boy. I feel like this is one of the only movies that I've ever seen, along with 2001: A Space Odyssey, that feels like an anomaly. It feels like it's a movie made to tell you a deep, dark secret. It's one of the darkest movies I've ever seen, and any movie that deals with the brutal and blatant death of children is criteria for one of the darkest movies I'll ever see. This has some of the more dark and disturbing medical horror I've ever seen, with this unknown affliction brought upon the kids at the hand of Barry Keoghan's beautifully diabolical anti-hero, Martin. This also has some of my favorite of Yorgos and Robbie Ryan's cinematography, with this being one of their more refined films cinematically. It has a very firm vision, and it doesn't experiment much. It just uses an experimental exterior to let you into this very disturbing story about a man who has his power ripped out from under him by someone he finds seemingly powerless. My top 2 are the most interchangeable out of all of these, and I'm going off of which one I would put on right now if I could. I feel like this is a movie that is going to be one of the least controversial picks on my list because I think that everybody loves this movie. The Favourite tells the story of 2 women fighting for the affections of Queen Anne. I can't really think of somebody that I know who doesn't think that this is at the very, very least okay. I didn't expect this movie to be so much fucking fun the entire time. Nothing about this movie bored me, even though it was obviously a little bit long. It has some of, if not his best performances in all of the 3 leads. Olivia Colman solidified herself as one of my favorite actors of all time in this movie. Rachel Weisz was the biggest surprise for me when I watched this. I had never been too familiar with her at all until I saw this and the pilot of the Dead Ringers miniseries, and she's become a huge standout in most of the things that I see her in. I just think that this movie is just a giant knockout, and I think that it's deserved all of the praise that it's gotten since it came out. I think that this has become the widespread pick for the favorite of his movies, and it's for a good reason. Poor Things tells the story of a woman reborn and discovering the world all over again. Emma Stone gives one of the most meticulous performances of the last decade. Robbie Ryan's cinematography crafts worlds that are like beautiful, sprawling murals that you feel like you could touch. The production design is some of the most successfully Kubrick-like, where it isn't heavy-handed, but it's still very zany and weird. The evolution of costumes and colors throughout this movie brings the audience along with us mentally with Bella. This movie has become such a comfort movie for me over the past few months since its release, and I never thought that such a sick and perverted movie would make me feel so cozy and relaxed. Lately, I've been putting it on whenever I just don't know what to watch, along with Mad Max Fury Road and Dune Part 2. Bella Baxter has also become one of the most endearing and iconic characters in the current era of cinema, and I would have loved to live in this world with her for hours and hours and hours. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe and follow me on socials like Letterboxd and Instagram to get more of my opinions on movies. My name is Jake. I'm gonna go hide in a trunk, and I'll see you, Space Cowboy.